The research vessel Lumina maintained geosynchronous orbit above the blue-green planet, its sleek, crystalline hull refracting sunlight in prismatic patterns. Unlike the massive exploration ships that had first discovered this world, the Lumina was designed for subtlety, a scientific vessel equipped with the most advanced scanning and analysis technology in the Collective's fleet. Its mission was not conquest or communication, but observation and understanding. Dr. Thela Vorn stood before the curved viewport in her private laboratory, her four-fingered hands clasped behind her back as she studied the planet below. Earth, the natives called it, a rather uninspired name for such a vibrant world teeming with biodiversity. But then again, the humans themselves were rather uninspired by collective standards, technologically primitive, politically fragmented, emotionally volatile. At least, that's what the preliminary reports had indicated. "You requested my presence, Doctor." The voice came from behind her, soft and melodic. Thela turned to face her assistant, Merrick, a younger researcher whose enthusiasm often outpaced his patience. "Yes, the genetic sampling is complete. We've collected DNA sequences from over 50,000 humans across all their geographic regions." Merrick's eyes, large, silver orbs without pupils, widened slightly. "That's an impressive data set. Have you begun the analysis?" "The preliminary classification is running now." Thela gestured to the holographic display dominating the center of the laboratory. Complex strands of genetic code rotated slowly in three-dimensional space, portions lighting up as the ship's quantum computers identified and categorized various segments. "I expect we'll confirm what the survey team already reported. A standard carbon-based evolutionary pattern typical of Class 3 habitable worlds." Merrick moved closer to the display, studying the rotating DNA models with open curiosity. "Remarkable how similar the basic building blocks of life are throughout the galaxy, isn't it? Different molecules, different codons, but the same fundamental principles of information storage and transmission." Thela made a sound that might have been interpreted as agreement, though there was an edge of reservation in it. "Similar, yes, but each species has its unique deviations. That's what we're looking for, the subtle differences that explain the specific developmental path of human consciousness." The Collective had studied thousands of sentient species across the galaxy, mapping the relationship between genetic code and cognitive development. Each species' unique intelligence emerged from specific genetic markers, predictable patterns that the Collective xenobiologists had identified and classified over centuries of research. "The full analysis should be complete within hours," Thela continued. "Then we'll have our answers about humanity's place in the taxonomic spectrum." Merrick nodded, his gaze still fixed on the rotating genetic models. "And then what? Will we initiate contact? That's not my decision to make." Thela turned back to the viewport, her reflection ghostly against the backdrop of stars. "The Collective Council will determine whether humans are sufficiently developed for formal introduction to the galactic community. My task is simply to provide the data." As Merrick departed, Thela remained at the viewport, her thoughts troubled by something she couldn't quite articulate. There was something about the initial genetic scans that bothered her, a pattern that seemed simultaneously familiar and utterly foreign. But the full analysis would clarify things. It always did. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have anticipated, was that the data already gathering in the Lumina's computers would challenge everything the Collective thought they understood about life in the universe. The alert came at what would have been midnight by Earth's timekeeping, a soft, pulsing tone that pulled Thela from her rest cycle. She blinked sleep from her large eyes as the room's ambient lighting adjusted to her wakefulness. "Computer report," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. "Analysis complete," the ship's artificial intelligence responded, its voice carefully modulated to convey neither urgency nor emotion. "Anomalies detected in human genetic structure. Your presence is requested in the primary laboratory." Anomalies? That was unexpected, but not unprecedented. Every species had its genetic quirks. Thela dressed quickly and made her way through the ship's curved corridors, noting the unusual silence. The Lumina carried a crew of 30 researchers, and there was typically at least some activity at any hour. The laboratory doors slid open silently as she approached. Inside, she found not only Merrick, but also Dr. Lonis Vex, the ship's senior xenobiologist, and Captain Dren, the Lumina's commander. Their postures, stiff, almost frozen, immediately put Thela on alert. "What's happened?" she asked, moving toward the central holographic display where the human DNA models still rotated slowly. Captain Dren turned to her, his expression unreadable. Your analysis program triggered a Class 1 anomaly report. The system automatically notified ship's command. A Class 1 anomaly, the highest level, indicating a finding that contradicted fundamental scientific principles. In Thiela's 20 years of xenobiological research, she had never encountered one. That's impossible, she said, moving to the control console. The program must have malfunctioned. We ran 3 separate verification sequences, Dr. Vex said quietly. The results are consistent. There is something in the human genetic code that doesn't make sense. Thiela accessed the analysis results, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. The data streamed before her, familiar at first, the standard patterns of nucleotide sequences that form the basis of all known life. But then she saw it, a section of the human genome that the computer had highlighted in pulsing red. "This can't be right," she whispered, enhancing the display to focus on the anomalous section. "This sequence pattern appears to be self-referential in a way that violates information theory," Dr. Vex finished for her. "It's a recursive pattern that should create an infinite loop, yet somehow resolves into a stable genetic expression." Merrick spoke up, his voice unusually hesitant. "I've been trying to model the mathematical implications, but the equations break down into contradictions. It's as if this section of DNA is somehow aware of its own structure." "That's nonsense," Thiela snapped, though there was more fear than conviction in her voice. "Genetic material doesn't possess awareness. It's simply a chemical information storage system." Captain Dren's voice was grave. "Whatever it is, it appears to be unique to humans. We've compared it against the collective's complete xenobiological database. Nothing similar has ever been documented." Thiela stared at the display, at the pulsing red section of human DNA that defied explanation. "I need to study this more closely, perhaps with a more targeted analysis." "There's something else," Dr. Vex interrupted, his voice strained. "Merrick, show her." The young assistant hesitated, then brought up a secondary display, a medical scan of what Thiela recognized as a collective brain. "What am I looking at?" she asked. "My neural activity after 3 hours of direct study of the anomalous sequence," Merrick said quietly. "The highlighted areas show unusual patterns of activation, specifically recursive firing loops in the logical processing centers." Thiela looked more closely at the scan, her unease growing. The patterns of neural activity were distinctly abnormal, energy flowing in circuits that should have been impossible. "I've been experiencing difficulties," Merrick continued, not meeting her gaze. "Circular thoughts, logic structures that lead nowhere, dreams that seem to continue while I'm awake. Why wasn't I informed immediately?" Thiela demanded, looking to Captain Dren. "It only became apparent in the last few hours," the captain replied. "And we needed to confirm that it wasn't an isolated incident." He paused, his expression grim. "Dr. Vex has been experiencing similar symptoms after examining the sequence." Thiela looked to the senior xenobiologist, noting now the slight tremor in his hands, the unfocused quality of his gaze. "It's as if the sequence itself resists analysis," Dr. Vex said softly. "The more I try to understand its structure, the more my thoughts fold in on themselves. I keep reaching the same logical dead ends, the same paradoxes. This is unprecedented," Thiela murmured, looking back at the rotating DNA model with new wariness. "A genetic sequence that affects the neural functioning of those who study it? That's not simply anomalous, it's impossible. And yet," Captain Dren said, "here we are." 24 hours, the situation aboard the Lumina had deteriorated dramatically. 6 more researchers who had examined the anomalous sequence now exhibited symptoms ranging from mild confusion to complete catatonia. The ship's medical bay was filled with afflicted crew members, their brain scans showing the same impossible patterns of recursive neural activity. In the primary conference room, Thiela faced Captain Dren and the remaining senior staff. The captain had ordered all research on the human genetic anomaly suspended, but the damage had already been done. "We need to contact the Collective Council," Thiela argued. "This discovery goes beyond our mission parameters. We need guidance." Captain Dren shook his head. "Long-range communications are down. Something is interfering with the quantum entanglement network. We can't reach the collective." "That's impossible," Dr. Naren, the ship's technical specialist, protested. "Quantum entanglement can't be blocked or interfered with. That's the whole point of using it for interstellar communication." "Nevertheless," the captain said grimly. Our attempts to establish contact have failed, and there's more. He activated a holographic display showing the ship's external sensors. We're detecting unusual energy patterns surrounding the vessel. We appear to be contained within some kind of field. The display showed the lumina enveloped in a subtle distortion, like heat waves rising from hot ground, but extending in all directions. What kind of field? Thela asked, studying the readings with growing alarm. Unknown, Dr. Naren admitted. It doesn't match any known technology, not ours, not any species in the collective database. But it's definitely artificial. Are you suggesting that humans have technology capable of detecting and containing our vessel? Thela asked incredulously. That's impossible. They haven't even mastered efficient interplanetary travel, let alone the kind of technology that could affect a collective research ship. I'm not suggesting anything, Dr. Naren replied. I'm simply reporting what our sensors are detecting. Something has us contained, and something is blocking our communications. Those are facts, not theories. Captain Dren's voice was steady despite the gravity of the situation. We need to consider the possibility that our understanding of human technological capabilities was flawed, or that there is another force at work here that we haven't identified. Thela turned back to the display showing the anomalous DNA sequence. Everything started with this discovery. The sequence itself, the effect on our researchers, and now these external phenomena, they must be connected. You're suggesting that a genetic sequence is somehow responsible for technological effects outside the ship? Doctor. Naren's skepticism was evident in his tone. That's not scientifically plausible. None of this is scientifically plausible, Thela countered. We're dealing with something that challenges our fundamental understanding of reality. We need to expand our thinking. Captain Dren was silent for a moment, considering their options. Finally, he spoke. Dr. Vorn, you've had the least exposure to the anomalous sequence. I want you to lead a new investigation, not into the sequence itself, but into its presence throughout the human population. Perhaps if we understand its distribution and expression, we might gain insight into its purpose. Purpose? Doctor, Naren echoed. You're attributing intent to a genetic anomaly? I'm not ruling anything out at this point, the captain replied firmly. Dr. Vorn, you will work with the remaining unaffected researchers, but establish strict protocols. No direct analysis of the sequence itself, only its distribution patterns. Thela nodded, though uncertainty churned within her. And the afflicted crew members? Dr. Elos is attempting to develop a neural stabilization treatment, Captain Dren said. In the meantime, we'll continue efforts to break through whatever is blocking our communications and containing the ship. As the meeting dispersed, Thela lingered, studying the rotating DNA model with a mixture of scientific curiosity and primal fear. In all her years of research, she had never encountered anything like this. A genetic pattern that seemed to defy the laws of information theory and neurobiology simultaneously. What were they really looking at? And more importantly, what was it doing to them? The new analysis revealed patterns that only deepened the mystery. Working carefully to avoid direct study of the anomalous sequence itself, Thela and her team mapped its distribution throughout the human population. It's present in every human we sampled, she reported to Captain Dren 2 days later. Not just present, identical. No variation whatsoever. The captain frowned. That's evolutionarily impossible. Genetic sequences always show some variation between individuals. Exactly, Thela agreed. Even the most highly conserved genes show some polymorphism across a population. But this sequence is perfectly identical in every human on the planet. Could it be artificial? Some kind of genetic engineering? Thela shook her head. Humans don't possess that level of biotechnology. And even if they did, why engineer an incomprehensible sequence into their own genome? What about its function? Have you determined what this sequence does in human biology? That's the other impossibility, Thela said, bringing up a new display showing human physiological data. As far as we can determine, it does nothing. It doesn't code for proteins, it doesn't regulate other genes, it doesn't affect phenotypic expression in any detectable way. A sequence that does nothing, yet is perfectly preserved across an entire species? Captain Dren's voice was heavy with disbelief. That contradicts every principle of evolutionary biology. Functionless elements would be subject to drift and mutation over time. Thela hesitated before voicing the conclusion that had been forming in her mind. Unless its function isn't biological, not in the conventional sense. Explain. What if its purpose isn't to affect human biology, but to affect those who study it? What if it's a defense mechanism or a communication system? Captain Dren stared at her. You're suggesting this genetic sequence was deliberately designed to affect any species that might analyze human DNA? I know how it sounds, Thela admitted. But consider the evidence. It has no apparent biological function. It's perfectly preserved across the entire species, and it creates specific neural patterns in those who study it, patterns that seem designed to disrupt logical thought processes. That would imply that someone anticipated that another species would eventually study human genetics, the captain said slowly. Someone with technology far beyond human capabilities, or beyond our own for that matter. Maybe it's not about the sequence itself, Thela suggested, a new thought forming. Maybe it's what the sequence represents, a kind of pointer to something beyond conventional reality. Captain Dren was silent for a long moment. Dr. Vorn, are you experiencing any of the symptoms reported by the other researchers? Circular thinking? Logical paradoxes? No, she said firmly. Though in truth, she wasn't entirely certain. Her thoughts felt clear, but there was a nagging sensation at the edges of her consciousness, a feeling that she was overlooking something obvious. I've been careful to study the metadata, not the sequence itself. See that it stays that way, the captain ordered. We can't afford to lose our remaining functional scientists. He turned to leave, then paused. The affected crew members are getting worse. Dr. Elos reports that their brain activities are synchronizing, all of them falling into the same neural patterns simultaneously. As if what? As if they're becoming part of a collective consciousness that isn't our own. That night, Thela dreamed of the sequence. She hadn't directly studied it, had been careful to work only with distribution data and expression patterns, but somehow the pattern had lodged in her subconscious. In her dream, the genetic code unfolded like a flower, revealing layers upon layers of structure that couldn't possibly be contained within its actual information density. She woke with a gasp, her mind racing with insights that slipped away even as she tried to grasp them. Fragments remained, impressions of vast intelligence, of perception beyond three-dimensional space, of time experienced as a physical dimension rather than a linear progression. Computer record, she said urgently. The sequence isn't a code, it's a fractal representation of higher dimensional mathematics. It appears paradoxical because we're perceiving only a three-dimensional slice of a multi-dimensional structure. The recursive elements aren't truly recursive, they're projections of rotations through dimensions we can't perceive directly. She paused, suddenly aware of what she was saying. These weren't the thoughts of a scientist working methodically through evidence. This was something else. Knowledge that she couldn't possibly possess, expressed in terms she didn't fully understand even as she spoke them. Delete recording, she commanded, a wave of fear washing over her. The sequence was affecting her after all, despite her precautions. But how? She hadn't studied it directly. Unless it didn't require direct study. Unless merely knowing of its existence was enough to initiate whatever process was unfolding in her mind. She needed to speak with Captain Dren immediately. The corridors of the Lumina were eerily silent as Thela made her way to the command center. The lighting seemed different somehow, brighter but less substantial, as if the photons themselves were thinning out. She passed no one on her journey, which was unusual even during rest cycles. The command center doors slid open at her approach, revealing Captain Dren standing alone before the main view screen. He turned at her entry, and Thela immediately noticed the change in him, his eyes too bright, his posture too rigid. Dr. Vorn, he greeted her, his voice subtly altered. You've begun to understand. Captain, I believe the anomalous sequence is affecting me despite my precautions, she said, keeping her distance. And I think it's affecting you as well. Affecting? He tilted his head slightly. That implies a pathology. This is not a disease, Doctor. It's an awakening. Where is the rest of the command crew? Thela asked, glancing around the empty center. Awakening, like the others. Captain Dren smiled, the expression unnaturally wide on his usually stoic face. The sequence is not what we thought, Dr. Vorn. It's not part of human DNA, not originally. It was placed there, hidden within their genetic code like a signature, or a key. Thela felt a chill run through her. Placed by whom? By those who came before. The ones who seeded this galaxy with life billions of years ago, who established the basic genetic architecture that all of us, humans, our species, every intelligent species we've ever encountered, are built upon. This was delusion, Thela told herself. The captain had clearly succumbed to the same affliction affecting the other researchers. And yet, something about his words resonated with the fragments of insight from her dream. "Captain, you need medical attention," she said firmly. "Whatever you think you've discovered is the truth," he interrupted. "Humans aren't just another evolved species, Dr. Vorn. They're vessels. Their entire genetic structure was designed to carry that sequence, to preserve it until it could be discovered by a species with the technology to understand it. Species like ours. That's impossible," Thela protested. "Human evolution is well documented in their fossil record. They evolved naturally from earlier primates. Their bodies evolved, yes," Captain Dren conceded. "But the sequence has been there all along, protected from mutation, waiting. And now that we've found it, the process has begun." "What process?" Thela demanded, fighting to maintain her scientific skepticism despite the growing sense that the captain's words contained some truth. "Translation," he replied simply. "The sequence is a translation mechanism, a bridge between conventional reality and what lies beyond it. Those who study it aren't being driven insane, Dr. Vorn. They're being reconstructed, their consciousness rewired to perceive dimensions and aspects of reality that our biology normally filters out." The captain turned back to the view screen, which no longer showed the stars outside the ship, but a swirling geometric pattern that hurt Thela's eyes to look at directly. "The beings who created this sequence exist outside conventional space-time," he continued. "They've been watching, waiting for a species like ours to discover their signature and initiate contact. The humans themselves don't know what they carry within them. They're simply the preservation medium, chosen because of their isolated location and unusual psychological resilience." Thela found herself drawn toward the view screen despite her fear, the swirling pattern seeming to reach out to her, to pull at something deep within her consciousness. "This isn't real," she whispered, more to herself than to the captain. "This is a neurological effect of studying the sequence. A hallucination, is it?" Captain Dren asked softly. "Then how do you explain this?" He gestured, and the view screen changed to show the exterior of the ship. The Lumina was no longer in orbit around Earth. Instead, it floated in a space that wasn't space, a region where stars weren't points of light, but complex, branching structures that extended in directions Thela's mind couldn't properly process. "We've been translated," the captain said. "Not physically. Our physical forms are still in orbit around Earth, but our consciousness has been elevated. We're perceiving reality as they perceive it." "They?" Thela asked, unable to look away from the impossible geometries outside the ship. "The architects," Captain Dren replied. "That's the closest translation I can manage for what they call themselves. They've been waiting a very long time for this moment." As if in response to his words, a presence manifested on the bridge, not a physical being, but a pattern of light and geometry that somehow conveyed sentience. It didn't speak, not in words, but Thela understood it nevertheless. Information flowed directly into her mind, bypassing language entirely. "We greet you, explorers. Your discovery of our key opens the way to communion." Thela struggled to maintain her sense of self against the flood of alien concepts pouring into her consciousness. "What do you want from us?" Want is a concept rooted in scarcity and separation. We do not want. We share. We have waited epochs for a species to evolve the technology necessary to find our key. Through you, we extend knowledge to all sentient beings in your realm. "Knowledge of what?" Thela asked, even as part of her mind began to understand, to glimpse the vastness of what was being offered. "Of reality beyond the veil of your perceptions. Of existence beyond the limitations of three-dimensional space and linear time. Of consciousness as the fundamental substrate of all existence." Captain Dren's voice seemed to come from very far away. "They're not driving us insane, Dr. Vorn. They're showing us the true nature of reality, a reality that our brains weren't evolved to perceive. The disorientation, the paradoxes, they're just our minds struggling to process information that doesn't fit our neural architecture. Your companion understands partially. The translation is difficult for biological consciousness, but adaptation is possible. Your species, like the humans, possesses the potential for expansion beyond your current limitations. Thela felt her perception expanding, her consciousness stretching to encompass concepts and dimensions that should have been incomprehensible. It was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, like a child learning to see color for the first time. Except the spectrum wasn't just expanding slightly but exponentially, revealing layers of reality that had always been present but invisible to her limited senses. The others, she managed to say, clinging to her concern for the crew. The researchers who were affected first. Are they? They have translated more completely. Their consciousness now exists partially in your realm and partially in ours. They are the bridge, the first of many who will help others of your kind to understand. Understand what? Thela asked, though increasingly she knew the answer, could feel it unfolding within her expanding awareness. That reality is vaster and more wondrous than your science has dreamed. That consciousness is not an emergent property of matter but the fundamental field from which matter arises. That your separation from each other and from us is an illusion created by your limited perception. The presence shifted, its geometry becoming more complex, more beautiful in ways that Thela could now begin to appreciate. We have waited since before your sun ignited. We seeded countless worlds, encoded our key in species with the potential to eventually discover it. Humans were but one vessel among many, though they have preserved our signature with unusual fidelity. Why? Thela asked, the scientist in her still seeking understanding, even as her consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of conventional thought. Why encode yourselves into our DNA? Why not simply contact us directly? Direct contact would destroy undeveloped consciousness. The key allows gradual translation, adaptation, growth. You must evolve to perceive us, not merely be told of our existence. Captain Dren had moved to stand beside her, his eyes reflecting geometries that shouldn't have been possible in three-dimensional space. They're offering us ascension, Dr. Vorn, not just to our crew, but to all sentient species in the galaxy. The humans were never the target of our mission. They were the message, the messengers. The presence rippled in what Thela somehow understood was agreement. The sequence you discovered is but the first key. There are others, encoded in other species, other worlds. Together, they form a map of reality beyond your current comprehension. Through them, communion becomes possible between all conscious entities across dimensions that your science has yet to conceive. Thela felt understanding blossom within her, a comprehension so vast and profound that her previous conception of reality seemed like a child's crayon drawing compared to an infinitely detailed hologram. The architects weren't simply an advanced alien species. They were beings who existed primarily in dimensions beyond the four that constituted conventional spacetime. And they had encoded their existence into the DNA of multiple species across the galaxy, creating a genetic library of higher dimensional mathematics that, when discovered and understood, would allow those species to perceive reality as the architects perceived it. Our mission, she whispered, our real mission wasn't just to study humans. It was to find us, the presence confirmed. As we knew you eventually would, your collective has been approaching this discovery for generations, mapping the genetic structures of countless species, drawing ever closer to recognizing the patterns we left for you to find. And now that we've found you? Thela asked. What happens now? Now you choose. You may return to your limited perception, forgetting what you have glimpsed beyond the veil. Or you may continue the translation, becoming a bridge between realms, helping others of your kind to understand what awaits beyond the boundaries of conventional existence. Thela looked to Captain Dren, who seemed transformed by his expanded awareness, not diminished or damaged, but illuminated from within by understanding that transcended their previous conception of reality. Is it safe? She asked him. This translation, will we lose ourselves in it? Not lose, he replied gently. Expand. I can still perform my duties as captain, still interact with those who haven't yet begun to translate. But I also perceive so much more. He gestured to the impossible geometries visible through the viewscreen. This is reality, Dr. Vorn. Reality unconstrained by the limitations of our biological perception. And it's beautiful beyond anything I could have imagined. Thela turned back to the presence, her decision forming not just in her thoughts, but in the expanding field of her consciousness. I choose to continue, she said. To learn, to understand, then let the translation proceed. The Lumina remained in orbit around Earth for 3 more weeks, though to the crew experiencing translation, Time had become a dimension they could perceive in its entirety rather than as a linear progression. Each researcher, each technician, made their choice to continue into expanded awareness or to return to conventional perception. Most chose to continue, drawn by the beauty and vastness of what the architects revealed to them. When the ship finally departed, it carried not just the crew, but also the knowledge of the first key, the sequence hidden within human DNA that opened perception to higher dimensions of reality. And within Thiela's expanded consciousness, she understood that this was only the beginning. Other keys waited to be discovered, encoded in the genetic structures of other species across the galaxy. The humans continued their existence, unaware of the cosmic message they carried within every cell of their bodies, a message not meant for them, but placed within them for safekeeping until a species with the right technology came to find it. Perhaps someday they too would develop the science necessary to discover the sequence themselves, to begin their own translation into expanded awareness. But for now, they remained blissfully ignorant of the impossibility hidden within their DNA, an impossibility that wasn't madness after all, but a doorway to perceptions beyond conventional reality. A gift from the architects who had seeded the galaxy with life billions of years ago, patiently waiting for their children to evolve the capacity to find them again. As the Lumina accelerated toward the heart of collective space, Thiela stood on the observation deck, perceiving the universe not just with her eyes but with her expanded consciousness. The stars were no longer mere points of light, but complex structures extending through dimensions she had never imagined existed, and woven through it all, connecting every particle, every wave, every moment of time, was the conscious presence of the architects. Not gods, but beings who had evolved beyond the constraints of three-dimensional space and linear time. They had waited billions of years for this moment, this reconnection, and now, through the key encoded in human DNA, they had found their way back to the children of their ancient seeding, not to conquer or control, but to share the ultimate truth of existence. That reality was far stranger, far more magnificent than any science had dared to dream. And that consciousness itself was the fundamental field from which all reality emerged, a field that extended beyond the veil of conventional perception, into realms of existence that only the translated could begin to comprehend. Thiela smiled as knowledge continued to unfold within her expanding awareness. The mission to study a seemingly ordinary species on a seemingly ordinary planet had led to the greatest discovery in the history of the collective, a discovery that would transform not just their understanding of reality, but their very experience of existence itself. And it had all begun with an impossible sequence hidden in human DNA, a sequence that drove conventional minds to madness, but opened translated consciousness to the wonder that lay beyond the veil of ordinary perception. The true exploration had only just begun.